I really find myself getting into the weeds with this review. Hello and welcome to Rotted Review of the Day, and today I am taking a look at the 2019 Netflix release, In the Tall Grass. I went into this movie completely blind. I had no idea what it was about. I had no idea who was in it. I had no idea who wrote it. I had no idea who directed it. I had no idea about anything. I purposefully avoided any sort of reviews. I couldn't help but hear the whispers on the wind that some people really liked it, some people didn't, but enough that it was able to intrigue me, and I wanted to watch it. So something interesting happened to me while I was watching this one. About no more than 10 minutes in, I had a suspicion, and I paused the film, and I looked it up, and I had that suspicion confirmed. The feel of the storyline and the characters had Stephen King written all over it, and sure enough, it's based on a novella of his that he wrote in collaboration with his son, going by the pen name of Joe Hill. Somehow this one missed my radar. I'd never heard of In the Tall Grass before as a film or as a novella, but now I was watching it and this has got to be something based on Stephen King, sure enough. But the thing that I really enjoy about that is Stephen King is great at, a great many things, but one thing in particular that I particularly enjoy, everybody's tastes are different as far as, scares and creep factor and what they find intriguing. And I know that, there's people on this channel, some of my rotted souls and subscribers here that disagree with me on some fundamental aspects of that. And I think that that's perfectly all right. Whereas I am enthralled by haunted house stories and certain aspects of them, they might find that less interesting. And whereas I find the notion of vampires a bit played out and boring, they might be really attached to them. Well, one thing that I find really, really interesting is taking a very simple concept and making it impossible, and then having that just stand on its own as extraordinarily creepy, right up to the point of just downright scary. And Stephen King is masterful at that. Taking something that is improbable to the point of almost impossible, such as a clown in a storm drain. Or if you've ever read his short story compilation of Nightmares and Dreamscapes, there's one short story in there, the crawling finger, something of a, but basically, man just plods into his bathroom in a crappy apartment complex, and sticking out of the bathroom sink is a finger. And, it's kind of tapping around, and the story kind of goes into his relationship and battle that ensues with this finger that, as it extends, continues growing more and more and more knuckles. So it's taking a very simple but improbable to impossible concept and then expanding on it to the point of just being absolutely downright scary. But suffice it to say, this movie, In the Tall Grass, follows the characters of Becky and Cal, who are on a road trip going to San Diego for reasons as yet unspecified. And they take a stop in the middle of nowhere, basically just farmland, field land, grassland. And she's pregnant and she has to stop and be sick. And in that stop, while they're kind of pause and, collect their thoughts and their breath and so on, they hear a child yelling for help out in the middle of the field of grass, very tall grass. And, they kind of talk amongst themselves, it's like, just follow my voice. And he's like, I can't find you. Come and help me. And they go in and they soon find themselves lost. And what turns from improbably lost quickly turns to impossibly lost, with a series of very creepy events that occur. At one point, they decide that they want to jump up, see each other above the tall grass, and kind of get a fix on their location. And they do. They see each other. There's a church that they parked at earlier, and they see that in the background, and then they decide to jump up again. And this time, they don't see each other, and the church is way far off in the distance. So now we have gone from a very simple concept that is difficult, possibly, dread-inspiring, to impossible and outright frightening. And that's all I'm really going to say on the storyline itself, because honestly, anything else that I go into as far as the what happens and the mechanics and so forth, I think will sully the experience, and that I really don't want. Speaking of the experience, I do want to make a footnote here that if this review, or if you are intent on watching this movie and this review does nothing to dissuade you from that, which I hope it doesn't because I do recommend it, I would recommend very highly that you watch this movie in a room with surround sound, or at the very least a good left-right speaker balance. If you are watching this just on a normal TV that has no speaker bar, no left and right speakers and so forth, you're still going to, in my opinion, enjoy it, but you're not going to get the full experience of the concept of them being lost, because this really, really makes use of stereo sound to convey that effect. So, big warning on that one. So, I really enjoy simplicity in the concept, but here's the thing. Simplicity in concept, as far as a horror film, does not make a good feature-length horror film. Typically, it'll make a good short film. To make a good feature-length film, you need to take that concept and you need to expand on it. You need to have good characters. You need to have conflict that develops over the course of an hour and a half and ultimately leads to a solid conclusion. A good concept does not a good feature-length movie make. And I've seen that be a sin of so many filmmakers, where they have something that, like, hey, this is a really great idea. And it's like, you know what? It is. But you have to stretch that. You have to make that work over the course of an hour and a half. Otherwise, what you have is a good short film, and that's fine. But so many directors and writers and so forth try to stretch it out, and they wind up with just nothing but padding. And then you wind up with missed tempo, you wind up with boring sequences, and you wind up losing the audience somewhere between acts, 2 and 3. So that's a sin that this film does not make. And that is honestly one of the most remarkable things about it, and one of the things that I love the most about it is this concept has failure written all over it, as far as turning it into an hour and 46 some odd minute movie that this was. Everything about it was absolutely doomed to fail. You had a simple concept that would work for only about a short story. Hence, this was a novella, not a full novel. Granted, Stephen King novella is about a full novel. You had a very simplistic setting. Be prepared to see some grass, because that's pretty much where this movie takes place, is in a grassy field. So you have a very static setting as far as just kind of visual aesthetic goes for the entirety of the film. And you have a limited number of characters. I'm not going to say how many because I don't want to get into that. But, so as far as turning that into an hour and a half, 45-minute long film, this had failure written all over it. But it worked. It managed to work, and there's a few reasons why. And I'm going to give all the credit in the world to Stephen King and Joe Hill as writers, but also to Vincenzo Natali as the director of this film, who also adapted it for, this was a screenplay. There are concepts in here that made it from the novella to the film that ultimately made the film really pop and stand out. Now, as far as the static setting goes, that does get broken up in very, very subtle ways that, there's a lot of overhead shots. There's a lot of the scenery does change from time to time, and it also makes the scenery foreboding in and of itself through antagonistic kind of ways that does break up the monotony of it. So even though it is static, you feel that claustrophobia there, but it doesn't become tiresome. And as far as the storyline goes, this is where I'm going to break from my regular opinion on something here. I often find that having a situation where time and space are being distorted is something that can be very, very boring in a movie. I'm going to be in the next month or so reviewing Oculus, but I think, I saw that a few years back, and I remember that was something that I was thinking of, is when you have an enemy or a spirit or an antagonist that is able to manipulate time and space to always be in their favor. So it becomes boring because instead of a cat and mouse game of one trying to up the other, it just becomes a cat playing with its food. And at no point, it starts to become monotonous from the point of view of following our protagonists that, okay, well, they're trying something clever now. I bet the enemy's going to, find a way around that. They're just going to make it not happen. And there it is. So at some point, it does start to lose its edge. And in this film, it starts out pretty early on with establishing, as I was already willing to explain, the impossible simple situation that time and space are being distorted. To what degree remains to be seen. But one thing that this movie did really, really well, and it's a very simple concept that does break with this, is it gave it a face. This has to do with, there were a lot of good, kind of elder and cosmic horror elements of this one. The evil being older than the continent it stands on and so forth. But as overpowering as that can possibly be, how is a brother and sister duo just going to, up and fight this evil that's been around for longer than the land masses itself? Instead of dealing with it on that level, it simply becomes about surviving, and the antagonist also gives itself a face. And I'm really not going to get into a whole lot more than that, but suffice it to say, by having a face and something that is surmountable, as well as having the outcome be just survive and get out of the grass, it allows the characters to have that cat and mouse situation. Now, all of a sudden, we have the conflict that is more even-keeled. Now they have a situation where it's not just a cat playing with its food. So I think that by having that, it allowed the storyline to really feel rich all the way through. I never once felt like the characters were never, ever going to get out. There was the possibility, sure, but there was also the possibility that they could. If it had established way early on that they are in an impossible situation, they are in a maze with no end, they are in a place where there is no answer, then the remaining hour of the film would have been absolutely a snooze fest. But it wasn't, and I give all credit in the world, like I said, to the writers and director for making this as interesting as it is. So now I'm going to go ahead and throw up all the scores. As always, 4 different categories, each one worth up to 25 points for a total possible score of 100 points. And I was really a big fan of this one. I enjoyed the storyline. I enjoyed the characters. I enjoyed the conflict. I enjoyed the creep factor. The one thing that this really didn't do that I wish that it had was deliver some really great scares. This movie was intriguing, it was dreadful, it was terrifying on kind of a lower pit of the stomach throughout kind of, low bass hum kind of terror. But at no point did it ever reach for those peaks and, jump scare, you might call it. But regardless, just kind of, it never really put me on the edge of my seat waiting to have something pop out, and not necessarily for a jump scare, but for a good upper tempo fright. And it didn't really go for that, and I kind of wish that it had, because at that point it would have gone from an interesting storyline to an absolute roller coaster, and I think it just missed that. But I'm not going to really take any points off for that. I just think that if I had my way, I think that would have been an element in this movie. But if that's not what they were going for, and they were going for nothing but that low baseline kind of dread, I think that they achieved it very well. Acting, technicals, all told, everything about this was phenomenal. The technical aspects were especially well done. Again, to keep the aesthetic fresh and never feeling tiresome or static throughout, despite the fact that you had minimal characters in one setting that was very enclosed. I think that was just beautifully done. Shot, edited, the whole bit. So big marks on the technical there. I really don't have a whole lot of complaints about this movie. I'm not going to say that it was perfect, but I am going to say that what they were trying to set out to achieve was done about as well as I could have hoped for, and I really enjoyed it. And on that basis, would I recommend this movie? Absolutely, I would. Again, you're not in for a roller coaster, but you're in for a wild ride nonetheless. If you have Netflix and you like scary movies, I think you could do a whole lot worse, and that's for darn sure. So that should about do it. That's my review of 2019's In the Tall Grass on Netflix, available now, written by Stephen King and Joe Hill, directed by Vincenzo Natali. Thank you very, very much for joining me here today. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. If you like this video, please click like and subscribe, and if you want to support me further, my Patreon link is below. Remember, next time you want to watch a horror movie, first make sure that it's good and rotted.